My mother-in-law said I faked my pregnancy for my husband's $10 million 6 months later. She said it at the dinner table. Not in a whisper, not in a pulled-aside private conversation, not even in the passive-aggressive, half-coded way that women like her usually operate. She said it out loud with her wine glass in her hand and her husband sitting right next to her, while I was 8 months pregnant and could barely fit my chair close enough to reach my food. She said, I think we all know this baby isn't real. I want you to sit with that sentence for a second. Not just what it means, but how it lands when you're the person it's directed at. When you've spent the last 8 months throwing up every morning until 11, when your back has been in constant pain since month 5, when you've watched your body change in ways that are beautiful and terrifying simultaneously, when you have ultrasound photos on your refrigerator and a name picked out and a nursery half finished with a mobile your husband spent 3 weekends assembling, when the baby currently pressing against your ribcage from the inside is as real as anything you've ever experienced in your life. She said it at the dinner table and then she took a sip of her wine. Her name is Donna. I have called her that to her face exactly twice in 6 years of knowing her, because she insisted from the beginning that I call her mom, which I did because I was 26 and newly married and trying to be the kind of daughter-in-law who made things easy. I am 32 now, and I have earned the right to call her Donna, and I am going to do it for the rest of this story. My husband's name is Caleb. He comes from money in the specific, quiet, third-generation way where it's just always been there. Not flashy, not performed, just present, like the way certain families have furniture that belonged to someone's grandmother and nobody thinks to question whether it belongs. His grandfather built something real. His father managed it carefully. By the time Caleb turned 30, he had a trust that was, on paper, worth somewhere north of $10 million. He doesn't talk about it much. He drives a normal car and wears regular clothes and works a regular job because his parents raised him to believe that the money was a safety net, not a personality. I loved that about him before I knew about the trust, and I would have loved him without it, which is the thing that seems to be impossible for certain people to accept. Donna accepted nothing about me from the beginning. I want to be fair to the history here because if I just tell you about the dinner table, you'll think it came out of nowhere and it didn't. From the day Caleb brought me home, I was 25, I was a graphic designer. I grew up in a medium-sized city in a family where my parents both worked regular jobs and money was always a thing you were careful with. Donna looked at me the way someone looks at a used car they suspect has had the odometer rolled back. Like she was searching for the thing that was being hidden. Like my affection for her son was a puzzle she needed to solve rather than a simple fact she could accept. She made small comments, the kind that are designed to land and designed to be deniable in equal measure. At the engagement dinner, she said, well, Caleb has always been very trusting. It's such a lovely quality. When I was planning the wedding, she asked 3 separate times in 3 separate conversations whether Caleb and I had discussed a prenuptial agreement, not suggesting it exactly, just mentioning it, making sure it was in the air. When I got the job offer that led to me leaving freelance and joining a real firm, she said, oh, that's nice. It's good to have something to keep you busy. Every sentence, a small, precise incision. Nothing you could hold up and say this right here, look at what she did. Just a constant ambient message that I was not quite what I appeared, that there was a version of me she suspected and was watching for. Caleb saw some of it. Not all of it, she was careful around him, which is its own form of skillfulness, but some. He'd occasionally say something like, my mom can be a lot, or she just needs time to warm up. And I'd nod and say I understood, because I did understand, in the same way you understand that a headache isn't going to kill you. It doesn't make it stop hurting. We got pregnant after 2 years of trying. 2 years is a long time in ways that are hard to explain to people who haven't been there. The monthly cycle of hope and waiting and disappointment. The clinical conversations that start to replace the emotional ones. The way your body starts to feel like a project you're managing rather than a home you live in. When the test came back positive, I cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes before I went out to tell Caleb, and he picked me up. Actually picked me up, which he hadn't done since our wedding day, and we stood in the kitchen holding on to each other, and I remember thinking, this is the happiest I have ever been in my life. We told his parents at 6 weeks, which was early but felt right. His dad, Richard, a quiet man who has always been kind to me in an understated way that I appreciate enormously, hugged us both and looked genuinely moved. Donna smiled and hugged Caleb and then turned to me with an expression I didn't fully process in the moment. Something that didn't quite match the situation. Something that I filed away in the back of my mind under things I'll think about later. I thought about it later. The pregnancy was hard, not dangerously hard, not the kind of hard that requires intervention, but relentlessly physically difficult. I was sick for the first 4 months in a way that made working feel like a Herculean act. My hips started giving me trouble in month 5. I gained weight in places I wasn't prepared for and watched my body become something new and strange and miraculous that I couldn't always keep up with emotionally. I had a therapist I was seeing every 2 weeks, and a doctor I saw monthly, and a husband who was genuinely consistently present in ways that made me feel, despite everything, like I was going to be okay. Donna came to the first ultrasound appointment. She asked if she could, and Caleb said yes, and I said yes, because what else do you say? And she sat in the room while the technician ran the wand, and we heard the heartbeat for the first time. I was crying before I knew I was going to cry. Caleb was holding my hand. Donna was standing slightly behind him, and when I looked at her, she had a small, tight smile, and again, something that didn't match. I looked away. I focused on the screen. The dinner happened at 7 months. Well, 8. I was almost 8 months by then. Caleb's parents host Sunday dinners once a month, formal things with actual tablecloths, and I'd been going to them for 6 years. I was tired that evening. I was always tired by that point. My body was doing something enormous and exhausting. But I went because I always went, because I was still trying, still performing the part of the easy, uncomplicated daughter in law who made things smooth. We were in the middle of the main course. Caleb and his dad were talking about something work related, one of those conversations that builds its own tunnel and excludes everyone else. I was eating slowly because everything was slow by then, and Donna was across the table, and she had been quiet for most of the meal in the particular way she gets quiet when she's building towards something. She put down her fork. She picked up her wine glass, and she said, I think we need to talk about something as a family. Caleb and Richard both came out of their conversation. The room had that sudden quality of everyone paying attention. She said, I've been doing some thinking and I've spoken to some people, and I think we all know this baby isn't real. The silence was extraordinary. She said, and she kept going. She had clearly rehearsed this. She had a whole architecture of it prepared. That I had been seen by a friend of hers at a bar 3 months earlier, drinking. That my pregnancy had been suspiciously easy to maintain socially. That I hadn't really shown until late. That she had spoken to, and I want to quote this precisely, a medical professional who had told her it was possible to fake the outward signs of pregnancy for a period of time. That I had a history of being financially motivated. And at that point, she gestured vaguely at our marriage in a way that was supposed to stand in for evidence. That she believed I had been faking the pregnancy to secure my position in Caleb's life, and specifically to secure access to his estate. $10 million. That was the number. That was what I was supposedly engineering this for. I looked at Caleb. He was looking at his mother. His face had gone through several things in quick succession and had landed on something I'd never seen on him before. A kind of cold, blank stillness that was somehow more alarming than anger would have been. Richard said, Donna. Just her name, like a warning. She said, I know this is hard to hear, but I'm trying to protect this family. Caleb said, stop. She said, Caleb, I have real concerns. He said, stop talking. She stopped. Not because she wanted to. Because the thing in his voice left no available direction but stop. I want to tell you what was happening in my body in that moment. Not for drama. Because I think it matters. I was 8 months pregnant, and something I can only describe as a wave moved through me. Not pain, not contractions, just this enormous surge of something. Adrenaline, maybe, or the bodily equivalent of every system going to high alert simultaneously. My hands were in my lap under the table, and they were shaking. I was not going to cry. I had made a decision in approximately the first 4 seconds of that speech that I was not going to cry at this table in this house, not tonight, not in front of her. I looked at Donna and I said very quietly, I'm going to need you to finish that thought, and then I'm going to need to leave. She looked at me. Something flickered in her expression. I think she'd expected tears. I think she'd expected defense, protestation, the collapse of someone caught. What she got instead was someone who had been waiting for this moment for 6 years without knowing they were waiting for it, and who was suddenly completely calm. She said, I just think before the baby arrives, we need to be certain that the baby, I said, is real. I'm 8 months pregnant. I've had 11 ultrasounds, 3 of which you were present for. I have a file of medical records 4 inches thick. My OB's name is Dr. Sandra Mercer, and I see her every 3 weeks, and I have her number in my phone if you'd like to call her right now. I picked up my purse. I am going home. Caleb, you can stay or come. That's your choice. He stood up before I'd finished the sentence. He didn't say goodbye to his parents. He walked around the table and put his hand on my back, and we left. We left the food on the plates and the wine in the glasses, and Richard sitting at the head of the table looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor, and Donna sitting across from him with her mouth slightly open. In the car, Caleb didn't start the engine right away. He sat with his hands on the steering wheel, And I sat next to him, and neither of us said anything for a long moment. Then he said, "I am so sorry." The way he said it, not the generic sorry of someone apologizing on behalf of something out of their control, but something that went deeper, something that sounded like a reckoning. Like he was hearing 6 years of small comments being replayed all at once and finally understanding what had been sitting inside. I said, "I know." He said, "This isn't going to continue." I said, "I know that too." We drove home. I changed into pajamas and lay on my side with a pillow under my belly, and Caleb sat on the edge of the bed and we talked for 2 hours. Really talked, the way we hadn't in a while, because when you're pregnant and exhausted and just trying to get through each day, the big conversations tend to get deferred. I told him things I'd been carrying, not as accusations, just as facts, finally allowed to exist out loud. The engagement dinner comment, the prenup questions, the years of small, precise incisions. He listened to all of it without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about him. He doesn't scramble to defend or explain, he just listens until he understands. At the end, he said, "I need to talk to her." I said, "I know." He said, "Not to fix it. I don't think this is fixable quickly, but I need her to understand what this was." I said, "Okay." He said, "And I need to tell you something." He paused. After the baby is born, if you want to step back from that relationship all the way back, completely, indefinitely, I support that. She's my mother and I love her. And I also need you to know that she does not get to do this and have nothing change. I looked at him. I said, "You do that." He said, "You're my family. You and this baby are my family." I cried then. Not in front of Donna. In my own bedroom with my husband at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night. The good kind of crying that comes when you've been holding something too long and someone gives you permission to put it down. Our daughter was born 6 weeks later. Her name is Willa. She came into the world at 6:53 in the morning, 7 pounds 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and Caleb's exact jaw. And when they put her on my chest, I looked at her, and every other thing that had happened in the previous 8 months became temporarily, completely beside the point. Caleb cried. He is not a man who cries often, and when he does, it's quiet, just his eyes filling and his jaw tightening. But he cried when he saw her, and I will carry that image with me for the rest of my life. Richard was in the waiting room. He'd driven himself to the hospital and sat there for 4 hours and came in when they let him and held Willa with the careful, reverent manner of a man who understood he was holding something significant, and he looked at me over her head and said, "She's extraordinary." Thank you. I didn't say anything. I just squeezed his arm. Richard is a good man who has spent decades making himself smaller around a difficult woman, and I have complicated feelings about that. But none of them reduce how much I appreciate him. Donna was not in the waiting room. She was not at the hospital. Whether that was her choice or Caleb's or some negotiated combination of the two, I didn't ask. It was the one day I didn't have to manage the Donna question, and I accepted that completely. She came to the house 3 weeks after Willa was born. Caleb had told me she was coming. I had said okay. I had spent those 3 weeks in the fog of new parenthood, the sleep deprivation, the physical recovery, the learning curve of a brand new human being who needs everything from you every hour. And I had not spent a lot of energy thinking about Donna because I simply didn't have it to spend. She knocked on the door, and Caleb answered, and I was sitting on the couch with Willa in my arms. And Donna came in, and she looked at the baby, and something happened on her face that I did not expect. Something that was not performance, not calculation. She looked at Willa the way everyone looks at a newborn when they're not guarding themselves, with something simple and real and completely undefended. She looked at me. She said, "She's beautiful." I said, "Yes." She said, "I owe you an apology." I looked at her. Caleb was standing slightly behind her, and I could see him in my peripheral vision, and he was very still. She said, "What I said, what I accused you of, was wrong. It was cruel and it was wrong, and I said it because I was afraid. That's not an excuse, but it's the truth." She paused. Her hands were clasped in front of her. She looked for the first time in 6 years like a person rather than a position. I have been afraid since Caleb was small of someone taking advantage of him. His whole life, I've watched him trust people, and I've watched people sometimes not deserve it, and I transferred that onto you in a way that was unfair for a long time. And then I went too far, and I can't undo that. The room was quiet. I said, "No, you can't." She nodded. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't try to soften it or explain it further. She just stood there and accepted the weight of it, which was the most honest thing I'd ever seen her do. I said, "I'm not going to pretend that what you said didn't happen or that we're fine now, because we're not. but I want Willa to know her grandmother. I want to try to build something that's real, not something I'm performing. That's going to take time and it's going to require different behavior from you, consistent different behavior, not just an apology and back to the way things were. She said, I understand. I said, okay. She asked if she could hold the baby. I said yes. She sat down and I put Willa in her arms and she held her with the careful reverence I'd seen in Richard 3 weeks earlier. And for a few minutes, we were just three people in a room with a baby. Nothing more complicated than that. That was 6 months ago now. Willa is 23 weeks old and she has strong opinions about ceiling fans and absolutely no interest in sleeping past 5 in the morning. She has Caleb's jaw and my eyes and a personality that seems to be entirely her own. She is the best thing that has ever happened to me without any competition, and I say that as someone who has had some genuinely good things happen. Donna and I are not close. I want to be honest about that rather than tie this up in a way that makes it neater than it is. We see each other at Sunday dinners again, which resumed about 2 months ago. She holds Willow when she comes over. She does not make incision comments anymore. Or if she does, she catches herself in them. I've seen it happen twice, this almost imperceptible pause and reroute, and I have chosen to receive that as effort rather than scrutinize it as insufficiency. It's not a warm relationship. It's a real one, which is different and maybe more sustainable. Caleb and his mother had a long conversation that I was not part of in the weeks after the dinner. I don't know exactly what was said. I know that when he came home from it, he was tired in the deep way, and he held me for a long time without saying anything. I know that things shifted between them after that in a way that's hard to articulate but visible. She is more careful with him now, and he is more honest with her. Whether that's entirely about me or about something larger that the dinner cracked open between them, I don't know. Maybe both. Here's the thing about being accused of faking something real. It doesn't just make you angry, though it makes you furious, deep in the bones furious, in a way that the word angry doesn't quite cover. It does something else too. It makes you look at every real thing you have and feel, briefly, the need to prove it, to justify it, to produce evidence for something that should simply be self-evident. And that instinct, that impulse to prove yourself to people who have already decided, is one you have to consciously resist over and over, because if you follow it too far, it starts to warp you. It starts to make you small in exactly the way the person accusing you was hoping you'd become. I didn't become small. I'd like to think I was never close to it, but I can't be fully honest and say I was never tempted, because I was. In those weeks after the dinner, when I was 8 months pregnant and exhausted and sitting with the enormity of what had been said, there were moments where I wanted to show up to every subsequent family event with my complete medical file and force everyone to read it, to make myself undeniable, to take up so much documented, verified, certified space that no one could look past me. But Willa came, and she was real in the most immediate and absolute way anything has ever been real in my life, and I put the need to prove myself down somewhere and mostly haven't picked it back up. The $10 million. I want to address that directly because I've thought about it a lot. Here's the truth. I don't think about Caleb's money in daily life. I think about our mortgage and our grocery bill and whether we need to get Willa into a better sleep schedule. I think about my job, which I went back to 8 weeks postpartum because I love it and because I'm a person outside of being a wife and a mother, and that matters to me. The trust exists the way his grandmother's furniture exists. Present, background, not the point. I didn't marry a balance sheet. I married a man who, on the night his mother accused me of something devastating, stood up from the table before I'd finished my sentence and put his hand on my back. That's the only math I keep track of. Willa is asleep in the next room right now. I can hear her on the monitor, these small, irregular breaths that I've memorized the rhythm of, that I wake up checking for at 3 in the morning out of pure reflexive love. Her room has the mobile Caleb spent 3 weekends building and a bookshelf we painted together, and a small framed photo on the dresser that Richard took at the hospital on the day she was born. Caleb and me looking down at her, neither of us looking at the camera, both of us completely somewhere else. Real. Every bit of it. Donna was wrong about all of it, and somewhere in the last 6 months, I think she started to understand what she almost cost herself. Not just the relationship with me, though that was real, but the chance to know her granddaughter from the beginning. The chance to be in that hospital room. The chance to be part of something she'd been so afraid of losing that she nearly destroyed it trying to protect it. Fear does that to people. It makes them see threats where there are none and miss the things right in front of them. I'm not absolved Donna of what she did. There's a version of what she said at that dinner table that I'm going to carry for the rest of my life, that I'll think about when Willa is old enough to ask about family and I have to decide how much of the truth to tell and when. but I also understand better than I want to how someone gets there. How years of fear and love and control collapsed into a wine glass and a dinner table and the worst sentence she's ever said out loud. Understanding it doesn't make it okay, but it makes it possible to sit across from her at Sunday dinner and pass the bread and watch her hold my daughter and decide, week by week, to keep trying. That's where we are. 6 months later, that's exactly where we are. It's not a fairy tale ending. It's just a life, the real, ongoing, complicated kind that doesn't resolve cleanly and doesn't need to. Willa just made a sound on the monitor. Half asleep noise, not a wake up. I know the difference now. I know every sound she makes. That's something no one can take from me. Not then, not now, not ever.